you enjoy. Oops, there you go. That is the reminder. We really hope you enjoyed today and the next 4 weeks of meetings and sessions. And I'd just like to leave the floor to the representative of the Creative Industries Federation, specifically Maya Krall-Fry, the Head of Development and Partnerships, that is introducing the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and it's lovely to see so many faces here today. I think there's about 45 of us on. Several of you don't have your videos on, and it's absolutely fine. But just to reiterate what Daniela said, I'd be thrilled if you could all introduce yourselves in the chat box as well, because it would be great to hear actually what all of you do, either within the creative industries or within your world of academia as well. I used to actually work at the Wellcome Trust, so always had a very strong interest and passion for that overlap between the world of academia and research and the creative industries as well. So as Daniela kindly mentioned, I am Maya Krall-Fry, the Head of Development and Partnerships here at the Creative Industries Federation, which is now part of the not-for-profit group, the Creative UK. We are ultimately a membership organisation that represents, champions and supports the UK's creative industries, and alongside our sister organisation Creative England work collaboratively to maximise all the opportunities for our sectors or sector, depending on how you want to differentiate the creative industries. And we work across everything from broadcast, TV, games, creative tech, crafts and design, fashion, architecture, the whole breadth of the creative industries, and also the creative industries that don't themselves necessarily recognise themselves at the moment as creative sectors, including beauty and fashion, and also sort of more corporate organisations as well within that. So we're very delighted to be asked to speak today as part of this great Oxford Brookes Creative Industries Festival, and to kick off an incredibly engaging programme over the next few weeks, touching on some brilliantly diverse and critical topics supporting and surrounding our creative sectors at the moment. So for anyone who perhaps doesn't really know what we are as the Creative Industries Federation or Creative England as well, and our work, we ultimately, through our unique and expansive network of creative organisations, work to influence policy and advocacy, and through our extensive UK-wide events programme, support and celebrate the work of our members. Our membership network comprises of more than 10,000 individuals from across creative organisations, businesses and educational institutions throughout the UK, including the Channel 4, BBC, Warner Brothers, TikTok, Sky Arts, National Theatre, Royal Shakespeare Company, all the way through to thousands of creative freelancers and micro businesses as well that make up the majority of the UK's creative industries. We also work very heavily with the higher education network as well, and that's the area that Lee, who I'll pass you on to shortly, looks after as well. And we also work alongside other key creative bodies like Arts Council England and the Creative Industries Council, ultimately to align, mobilise and advocate on behalf of our creative sectors and the people that work within them. And the Creative England side of our organisation that I mentioned is a sister company to us at the moment, and we'll be going through a joint rebrand this summer, so you'll see that soon. Creative England uncovers, connects and backs the best original storytellers, driving diversity, collaboration and growth in the creative screen industries, investing in talented people and their creative ideas, nurturing our very rich, diverse games, TV, film and digital media industries, both through direct investment and loans to business mentoring as well across the entirety of England. And we're looking to expand that into the devolved nations as well. We champion the best ideas of talented people and their businesses. And a lot of that work is funded through the BFI as well as other major delivery partners, including local authorities, and a lot of our initiatives are either sector specific or region specific. However, now going forward, we're more and more looking at how we can expand our work to ensure that we're keeping that USP of actually working across the creative sectors at the heart of it. And very predominantly, though, actually the Creative England side of our activities is hugely outside of London, and we're really looking to ensure that we're continuously providing more opportunities and access to those already working in the creative industries or new talent across the entirety of the UK. And so our Creative UK group is really entrenched in the UK's creative industries, extremely passionate about seeing it thrive and driving progress across as many fronts as we can, and in collaboration with many individuals and organisations, which is why we're coming together with key partners at events such as these, which is never ceases to be important. It's no secret that the UK's creative industries has been very hardly hit by the pandemic, and after a year, really has sort of turned the world on its head, and our sector has been left contemplating what the future might hold for not only the creative industries, for the country, and for generations to come as well. And this is really a moment and a time that we can really sort of reimagine and reignite and redefine actually what we want the future of our creative industries to look like, and really quite systemically how we want things to be done in the future. In June last year, so in June 2020, we began convening hundreds of creative practitioners from across the UK to do what creators do best, and that is imagine. And the result was Creative Coalition, a plan to reimagine, which is a very thorough document report that is equally digestible, that you can find on our website as well, which defines our collective vision for our creative future. And we actually, off the back of that, also ran a 3-day completely free to access festival in November last year that again did exactly that. It reimagined, redefined and reignited what we as the creative industries want our future to look like. And since then, we've really built on all of these different conversations and established the next steps needed to make these sort of projections a reality. What the key areas for us all to prioritize are, and not only to sort of look at how we rebuild, but actually how we harness the power of our sector to drive the whole of the UK forward. So today, with our Senior Development and Partnerships Manager for Talent and Skills, Lee Hornsby, we'll be looking back and taking stock on some of those impacts that we've had along the way and how they've led us to where we are currently. And then crucially, we're also going to be looking forward. So we'll be looking ahead at our plan to reignite and how we might get there with people, place and planet at the core of those ideas. We'll also hear from our Head of Research and Impact, Amanda Stevens, on a key piece of work we're leading on this summer to help make our case on behalf of the creative industries, which is titled State of the Nation, and really does what it says on the tin, and we're working with some major partners on that as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you again to the team at Oxford Brookes University for inviting us along. I'd really love to meet some of you in the chat box. As Danielle said, I've done this before, but I do genuinely want to meet all of you today and hopefully turn this into more of a discussion as purely a presentation. But now to hand over to my colleague, Lee Hornsby. So thank you so much to everybody.
Thanks, Maya, and hi everyone. Good to be here and good to see everyone. I should just add as well, we're going to give I'm going to give a really top-down view of how things have been and how things hopefully will be looking ahead. But we've also brought in Geraldine Collins from the Royal Shakespeare Company just to give a little bit more of a specific story around how the RSC have been doing and what they've got in mind too. So we'll be coming to Geraldine later on in the session. So yeah, this kind of first bit that I'm going to talk through is around setting the scene, really. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking back over this last year and beyond, really, looking at where we came from before the pandemic, even though it's sometimes hard to remember what life was like before that point. But looking at those impacts and developments that have happened across our creative industries, alongside the work that we've been doing with everyone across our networks and beyond. So I think the first thing I wanted to pull out really was just to we have to remember to remind ourselves just how much potential there actually is in our creative industries. And although the economic and employment statistics are not the only important metrics to talk about, they are impressive and they are important nonetheless. So just to give a few examples of what I'm talking about there, the creative industries contributed almost 116 billion in GVA to the UK economy in 2019, which is greater than aerospace, automotive, life sciences, and oil and gas sectors combined. Our sector represents almost 6% of the UK's GVA. We were growing at 4 times the rate of the UK economy as a whole and experienced strong growth in all parts of the UK between 2010 and 2018. The creative industries were creating jobs at 3 times the UK average, employing 2 million people across the UK. Employment in the sector grew by 21% in Northern Ireland, 30% in the West Midlands, and various other great statistics across the different regions across the UK too. Almost 1 in 8 UK businesses are creative businesses, and 95% of those employ 9 people or less. And 33% of creative workers are freelancers, which is double the wider UK economy. And in some subsectors, that figure is much higher, around 70% in music, performing and visual arts. And I'll come back to freelancing shortly. Obviously, they have been amongst some of the hardest hit over the last year or so. And finally, the creative industries exported 46 billion in goods and services worldwide and accounted for almost 12% of UK service exports. And there's loads more specific success stories and statistics broken down, or that you can break down by subsectors that make up our creative industries. The growth of our video game sector, the scale of our film and television productions, the influence of our musicians and music sector, fashion, advertising, design, and that list goes on, as everybody knows. I'm going to try and keep it as broad and national as possible, just for the sake of this session, and obviously for brevity today as well. I think the overall point to bear in mind there is that we have every reason, thinking about those statistics, to be confident in our sector's potential to bounce back and play a really integral part of the UK's social and economic regeneration. We've also been here before and proved what we can do. So there was a big recession, as everyone will remember, back in 2008. That lasted a few years, and all those statistics that I outlined there at the top, between 2010 2019, we grew at more than double the rate of the UK average. And I think thinking about those statistics with that context in mind is useful and helpful, and hopefully gives us lots of reasons to be optimistic. I know the circumstances are obviously different, but that resilience, that innovation, that problem-solving nature of creatives is baked into our industry, and I think that's also something to take heart in. So I'm going to look back now. Starting around March 2020, and I pulled some of this together last week, and obviously thinking about the last 12 months somewhat objectively was slightly sobering and not the most happiest of things to go through, but I think it's important to take stock, especially when we're thinking about where we want to get to. So starting in March, on the 16th of March, the PM, he advised that theatres, museums, venues and other cultural institutions close their doors. So the first of many lockdowns, or what feels like many lockdowns. And with those venues being advised to close their doors overnight, we, alongside many others, immediately called on government for financial support to be put in place to ensure that short-term survival of our sector, and flagging concern about the wider impact, particularly on self-employed and freelancers. So we were aware pretty quickly of the negative impacts that initial lockdown was going to have. Our CEO, Caroline Norbury, stated at the time, those lockdown measures have the potential to devastate the UK's theatres, museums, cinemas, venues and other cultural spaces reliant on audiences, visitors and participation, as well as the huge array of creators and freelancers who work within those industries. We did a pretty quick snap survey on the 17th of March, so immediately after that lockdown, and got over 3,000 responses. Over 70% of those respondents had already experienced a decrease in their income due to the pandemic, and those initial measures put into place. We also put out another snap poll in specifically at freelancers, and over half of those respondents told us that 100% of the work had been cancelled. So again, this is still back in March, but it just became very quickly apparent that that large proportion of freelance workers, who are already a significant proportion of our creative workforce across our sectors, were particularly vulnerable, along with parts of the sector that couldn't easily pivot to remote working and maintain the same sort of income streams, again, thinking about performing arts venues. So we linked up, or we started working with IPSI, the Association of Independent Professionals and the Self-Employed, and we called on government for emergency income protection for freelancers and the self-employed, and did a few campaigns around that, again, working with lots of different people across our organisation. Philip Pullman, the author, or Sir Philip Pullman, the author, said, in this confused and anxious time, those artists, writers, musicians and others who earn a fragile livelihood as self-employed suppliers of delight and consolation should not be forgotten. The need to support our freelance artists of every kind is urgent and imperative. And we got those sorts of messages from all sorts of prominent creatives and figures from across the network and across the industry. And on the 20th of March, the job retention scheme was announced by the Chancellor, and that allowed businesses to furlough staff, employed staff. And that was then followed by another announcement on the 26th of March around the self-employment income support scheme. So those urgent measures were crucial interventions for a lot of people in our sectors and for everyone across the UK. We know that they didn't support everyone that needed that support across the creative industries, and there was still huge concerns about short and mid-term impacts of the pandemic and the subsequent lockdowns. Both of those support schemes, so furloughing and SISE self-employment income support scheme, were extended in May, and have obviously been subsequently extended a few times since then as well. But sticking in May, obviously people were still struggling with work. Some people were getting support from those interventions from government, but we were still massively concerned, and so we ran a few more bits of research and some more surveys out to our membership, and this was between March and May. At the end of March, 42% of creative freelancers predicted an annual decrease in their income of more than 75% for the rest of the year, so 2020, and 63% of creative organisations a decrease in their annual turnover of more than 50%. 45% of organisations believe they could last up to 12 weeks on their existing reserves. And then in a follow-up piece of research and survey in early May, 40% of respondents reported that the impact of the outbreak hadn't been or wasn't being mitigated by the government support measures that had been put into place. And over a quarter, 28% of creative organisations anticipated having to make redundancies in the coming months. So that's kind of at the start of summer. And again, we'll come back to some of those statistics a little bit later. Some creative subsectors were suffering more than others, but just like all sectors across the economy and the world, everything is connected, and that's particularly the case across the creative industries. We don't work in kind of individual silos. Our creative industries are a diverse ecosystem and a series of quite complex supply chains made up of big and small organisations, and freelancers are all parts of that delivery that rely heavily on each other to produce their work and deliver their services. And so that was an integral point that we had to fold into all of our policy and advocacy work over the last year. Jumping a little bit ahead into summer, we commissioned research from Oxford Economics, which some of you might be familiar with, and that was in collaboration with numerous other partners that were representing our sectors from across the UK. And that was to try and put some forecasting and evidence behind the projected economic impact of the pandemic on our creative industries in the UK. So that report was published on the 17th of June and highlighted the extent of what was potentially going to come to fruition and that devastation that was looming across all of our creative subsectors, regionally and pretty universally, to be honest with you. Just some of those predictions: a combined revenue drop of £74 billion for the UK's creative industries in 2020, which is around £1.4 billion a week, with a GVA drop of £29 billion. 406,000 or 1 in 5 creative jobs were expected to be lost, which is more than 9 times the entire workforce of British Airways, triple the workforce of Asda in the UK. And we also pulled out that impact was going to be particularly felt in all parts of the UK, and projected to be hit twice as hard as the wider economy overall, and up to 3 times as hard regionally, depending on where you were. So that report highlighted and underpinned really the ask and the need for additional financial interventions from government, including some sort of a cultural renewal fund for creative businesses that were most in need across our sectors. And alongside that, the need for further expansions and extensions of those employment support schemes that government had already brought in. On the 5th of July, the Prime Minister did announce the £1.57 billion Cultural Recovery Fund for the creative industries. And our Chief Exec, Caroline Norbury, said at the time then, the voice of the creative sector has been heard loud and clear by the government, and we warmly welcome their response. This investment acknowledges the mission-critical role that the UK's creative industries play in recovery and growth in all parts of the country. So although that CRF was a welcome emergency measure, challenges across the sector still remained, particularly as those lockdowns kept on being extended or reintroduced across the autumn and the winter. And so we continued to talk to the sector and the people in it, and did another impact survey that we put out in December at the end of the year, to inform those campaigns in the lead up to the government spring budget, which again I'll come back to shortly. The headlines of that research, which we put out in February, so just a few months ago now, which again was kind of a more longer term assessment of where people were up to off the back of those interventions that had come into place, and still gave us some statistics that were quite worrying. So since the start of the pandemic, 63% of the respondents had seen their turnover decrease by more than half, with creative freelancers seeing the biggest drop in revenue. 3/4 of those working in areas dependent on live audiences had seen a drop in income of more than 50% since the pandemic began. Freelancers were 20% more likely than organisations to have seen a drop in income of 75% or more since the pandemic began. Respondents outside of London were 8% more likely to have seen a decrease in turnover of more than 75%. And across those respondents, those in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, so the devolved nations, were more than twice as likely to report that it would take over a year to return back to normal income levels if the pandemic were to end tomorrow. So still lots of reasons to be concerned across the board. The spring budget came in on the 3rd of March. So although I've breezed over a lot of the last year, it was a lot of campaigning, a lot of conversations, a lot of work. But the self-employed income support scheme was extended to the newly self-employed. So that was a positive development that came out of the spring budget. And then the wider extension of those support schemes and furloughing until September this year. And that additional injection into that CRF of £408 million into arts and culture. It was also announced as part of that spring budget. It's quite early days to assess the impact of the Cultural Recovery Fund. There is a report that the CEBR put together for Arts Council England, who disseminated 825 million of that initial Cultural Recovery Fund, who essentially said one of the key positive impacts of that fund is that by allowing more creative firms to survive the restrictions, that will support organisations in the sector to bounce back quicker than they would have had the intervention not come in, and assuming no further crises, of course. Although it still remains the case that creative subsectors in music and visual and performing arts have been hit the hardest. So that brings us more or less to now, obviously skipping many steps, but whilst everyone amongst all of that, we're doing their best to keep their heads above the water, we were also trying to spend a lot of time thinking about the future as well, which Maya alluded to in her introduction, and alongside the most pressing immediate concerns of the sector, trying to think ahead as well at the same time. So we carried on consulting with our networks, and we put together our plan to reimagine, which Maya mentioned, and essentially taken from that document to imagine a world where creativity is placed at the heart of our culture, at the heart of our economic regeneration, and the heart of our education system. A world where great ideas can be transformed into new realities, a world where the UK leads the globe in innovation and creativity, and in which creators are supported and valued as an intrinsic parts of this process. And to achieve that, we need to keep making our case to government, we need to keep making it to the wider public, and we do still need to keep talking about it with each other. I think most people on this call, I'd hope, are already converts, and they know how important and interesting and vital the creative industries are, but we need to keep expanding that outwards. One big piece of that puzzle, we embarked on a flagship piece of research, or embarking on a flagship piece of research that will give us some of that ammunition, up-to-date ammunition and evidence to do that, to make the case to government and everybody else. We've called it Our State of the Nation, at which we've nicked the title from for this session today. So that research will be the first of its kind in bringing together a comprehensive and accessible snapshot of insight into the creative industries across all 4 UK nations. So exploring the sector's economic and policy landscape. That research will demonstrate the creative industry's potential for growth in GVA, jobs and innovation, the value of creative education, and the key role our sector can play in contributing to the UK's COVID recovery. So hopefully playing a really integral role in supporting our ongoing high-profile policy and advocacy work on behalf of the sector, and useful resource for everybody who works in the creative industries to do the same as well. So I'm hoping Amanda Stevens, our head of research and impact, is logged on and is here, because she is going to, or was going to, talk us through our State of the Nation research. I don't know if anyone from Oxford Brookes can let me know if she's here.
Hello, Lee, I am here.
Jeez.
Oh. Hello, I don't seem to have any sound. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me join today. As Lee mentioned, I'm Amanda Stevens and I'm Head of Research and Impact at the Creative Industries Federation. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so just talking you through a major piece of research that's in progress here at the Federation, which I hope you'll find really interesting, and that's our forthcoming State of the Nation report. So let me just share my screen with you and I'll talk you through a couple of slides for a bit more of an illustration on what it is that we're doing. Bear with me just one moment. Okay, great. Can everybody see these slides that we've got here? Fantastic. Okay, so just talking you through a little bit of detail of what it is that we're going to be doing. The State of the Nation is a working title for a really ambitious piece of research that's being carried out by the Creative Industries Federation over the next couple of months. It's the piece that we have been designing since the beginning of the year. And our reason for doing this kind of fulfills two key purposes, really. The first of these is addressing a gap in insight. So we know that there is a huge amount of insight and research into the creative industries sort of circulating around already. But an issue is that this can be really difficult to decipher at times and really inaccessible for those who are not from a research background. So we wanted to develop a kind of comprehensive piece that's accessible to those who work in the sector and beyond. We also wanted to fulfill, our role as a voice for the sector. So, as you'll be aware, the Creative Industries Federation is an advocate for the creative industries. We champion the voice of the sector. And so what we wanted to do was to develop a piece that would support our work ongoing. So over the past year and well beyond that, we've advocated for the sector and its place in the very forefront of economic policy, from the introduction of the industrial strategy and the place of the creative industries within that, to more recent vital support for the sector in terms of employment and funding through the pandemic. In summer of this year, we will be starting to put together our case to government for the comprehensive spending review, for the multi-year spending review rather, and the asks that we have to government for continued investment and support in the creative industries. And this piece, we are hoping, will support that submission to government on behalf of the creative industries. So State of the Nation is a mixed method piece. And I'll talk you through in a little more detail about the approach that we're using to carry out the research. But in brief, we are using qualitative research, some secondary data analysis, and some really detailed and interesting economic analysis and forecasting in order to create this accessible and comprehensive snapshot of the creative industries. And you'll also be able to see just to the kind of right-hand side of this slide that we're also very lucky to be collaborating on this piece with a number of partners. So Oxford Economics to Bloomberg to the Open University and other key HE partners, as well as very, very lucky for us, our HE members within our HE working group and our sort of wider membership who are supporting us with evidence gathering. So you can probably see at the very top of this this slide there, you know, we mentioned Oxford Economics, and they're a key partner for us on this piece. Many of you will be aware that Oxford Economics are a leader in economic analysis, and after putting together a really detailed spec earlier this year, we asked a number of consultants to competitively tender for the economic analysis elements of this piece of research, and we're really pleased to have commissioned Oxford Economics to do that bit of the work for us. So we're really looking forward to what comes out of that really kind of integral piece within the research. So moving on, I'll just talk you a little bit through our approach. We came up with this approach in consultation with our members and our trade body representative groups and our HE working groups, so a number of different stakeholders that we engage with as kind of a umbrella body for the sector. We also had conversations with the devolved governments and sector bodies across the 4 home nations in order to inform our approach. And what we've come up with is a kind of 3-pronged approach to the research that we're going to be doing, which will then be underpinned by a series of recommendations and actionable points on how the sector should go forward. So the first part of this is looking at developing a profile for the creative industries. So as mentioned, there are loads of stats, there's lots of insight on the creative industries already, but it's just quite disparate and all over the place. So what we wanted to do is to bring context to this piece by using this as a starting point, but also bring everything together. So we'll be kind of profiling the economic value of the creative industry, so looking at the business landscape, the creative industries workforce, and lots of other key stats that I'm sure many people on this call will be familiar with, as again as a kind of opening piece and a go-to piece of profiling for the sector. We will then want to expand on this by looking at the creative industry supply chain. So going a bit further than just doing a profile of the size and shape of the sector, we also want to look at the wider economic footprint. And we will be undertaking a supply chain mapping exercise, which will look at the kind of economic opportunities that are created by the creative industry supply chain, as well as opportunities for trade as well. The second part of this research will look at the current state of play within the creative industries and the opportunities and challenges that the sector faces. So within that, the first area that we'll be looking at is COVID-19. Obviously really important. We know the adverse effect that the pandemic has had on the creative industries, but as well as kind of telling the story about how difficult that's been, we also want to be able to show how the sector has demonstrated resilience and innovation through the pandemic. So about how creative businesses have been able to work in different ways, pivot their business models, keep the country going, and what their role potentially might be in the UK's post-pandemic recovery. We're also going to be looking at Brexit and complementing that with a commentary on what the sector might need to continue to thrive in a post-Brexit world. And then we're going to be looking at other challenges and opportunities for the creative industries, and specifically around business finance and support as a means of supporting again, the sector to thrive and to grow. And then the final stage of the research will be to look at the future of the creative industry. So it will be a piece that combines qualitative analysis with economic forecasting. And we'll be kind of trying to set out, I guess, a vision for the sector for the future of the sector, using a mix of secondary analysis and case study research. So first of all, we'll be looking at the economic and social value of the creative industries workforce. So looking at the importance of creative skills and education, examining creative careers and their potential, looking at things like security for freelancers and highlighting their importance to the creative industries and to the wider UK workforce and economy. We'll also be highlighting innovation and the importance of that as a mechanism to drive business growth across the creative industries. And then finally gathering evidence on the importance and the value of investing in culture and arts and creative organisations, and how that can drive economic development and economic growth. And this is all quite top line, but we think it's a really important starting point to get a conversation going about the future of the creative industries. And then to further support this, this look at the future of the creative industries, we're undertaking a forecasting and trend analysis. So looking at the size and the shape and the potential performance of the creative industries over the short to medium term. So we're looking over the next 4 to 5 years at what the sector might look like, and trying to hopefully pull out some interesting sector trends and regional trends as well that we can highlight through the report. So just to give you a very sneak peek of some of the findings that we've come up with so far through our forecasting exercise, our supply chain mapping exercise. You can see a couple of graphs on this table which we think are really interesting. So first of all, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, the left-hand side, this shows the value of the creative industries in terms of its supply chain. So we know that back in 2019, we had a figure of around 115.9 billion pounds in terms of GVA for the creative industries value to the economy as a whole. When you look at the wider creative industry supply chain, that actually grows to 178 billion in GVA when you kind of add the multiplier effects that the creative industries has on other non-creative sectors. So the sectors that the creative industries buys from and supplies. And in terms of jobs, there were around 2 million jobs in the creative industries in 2019. That figure, when you kind of look at the wider supply chain, is around 3.5 million pounds. From our supply chain mapping exercise, so using existing data, Oxford Economics have come up with a kind of multiplier effect for the supply chain for the creative industries right now. So on the left-hand side, you can see GVA. And so for every £1 that's generated for the by the creative industries, another 50 pence is generated in a non-creative sector as a result of the purchasing power and the spend power and the collaboration of the creative industries elsewhere. So it's a really, really valuable sector in terms of GVA. In terms of jobs, on the right-hand side of this bar graph, you can see that there is a job multiplier of 1.7. So for every job created in the creative industries, another 0.7 jobs are created in the non-creative economies. On the right-hand side, there's a pie chart that shows creative imports. So we've been thinking about trade opportunities elsewhere, and you can see a breakdown of how the creative industries supply chain in terms of imports looks. And from this, we can see, the US was a key trading partner, but so was obviously the EU, as we would expect. But then moving forward, in terms of future trade opportunities. Our supply chain mapping exercise has revealed that in terms of imports, around £6.6 billion of goods and services were imported to the UK creative industries from the US. So going forward, the US is a major trading partner for us. We also have a really significant trading relationship with Ireland in terms of advertising and marketing. And our biggest trading partner in terms of tech and IT is India. So for many, I'm sure that those findings aren't surprising, but I think they're interesting nonetheless. In terms of thinking about the sort of potential for the sector and potential analysis as well on what our future relationships with trading partners might be. And then looking at employment in the creative industries. The bar graph, the pie chart on the right-hand side shows employment in the creative industries in 2019. And this is based on existing labour force data, but also on data that the Creative Industries Federation have generated through a major survey with our members on the impact of the pandemic on employment. So we know from our analysis that in 2020, in December 2020, 162,000 creative employees were furloughed, and another 29,000 were made redundant. We had 1.2 million who remained in employment. That picture isn't great. So we know that the number of creative employees that were furloughed in 2020 is around 12%. It is roughly around the level of the wider UK economy. However, what we're going to see that's been confirmed through our analysis is a growth again in employment in the creative industries to around 2.5 million employees in 2022, which we think is really exciting. So moving on to next steps for this piece, we're working really hard at the moment to pull together a project report that's going to be released in July. So there's a really very quick turnaround time for this piece. We're also looking at how we might be able to replicate the piece, and that's very exciting for us in the future. One of the really important things we feel is the ability to look at the progress of the sector over time and to be able to revisit the findings of our forecasting and other analysis and see, compared to this year and compared to years before, how the sector's actually faring. So to be able to replicate that will be great. We are, as I mentioned, pulling together a final project report that will be released in July. And alongside that, we're going to be running a number of regional events, which we're in the process of planning. And we feel they will be a great opportunity to keep the conversation going about the future of the creative industries. We're also hoping to produce web resources as well, where we'll be able to share some of the findings, and we're thinking about how we're going to do that right now. So we'll update, as and when we have more to tell you on that. But for now, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you very much for listening. If anybody's interested in learning more about the State of the Nation piece, as this was quite a whistle-stop tour, I'd be very happy to chat through in a bit more detail and update you. So please don't hesitate to give me to drop me a line. My details are just on this slide below. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back over to Lee.
Thanks, Amanda. Much appreciated. I'm just conscious of time, so I think I'm going to hand over to Geraldine in a moment, but just for context, obviously we've been giving a quite macro view of things in terms of, we're thinking nationally, we're thinking about the sector at large and everyone and everything within it. I thought it would be really important and interesting to just bring in one of our key members to talk a little bit more specifically about their experience over the last year and kind of the impacts and kind of relating back to the more general themes that we've been talking about today. So without further ado, I'll hand up to Geraldine Collins, who's Director of Creative Placemaking and Public Programmes at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Thanks, Lee, and yeah, great to hear all the work you're doing, and hello everybody here on the screen. I was going to share some pretty pictures, so I'll just do that. There we go. Mainly, like I say, they're just pictures, so hopefully you can see. Can you see that? Yeah, great. So as Lee said, and I'm aware I've only got 5 minutes, so you probably want some time for conversation at the end, so I'll be fairly brief. I'm Director of Creative Placemaking and Public Programmes, and it's a new role that's come out of our restructure and kind of come through a kind of revised sense of priorities through the pandemic, which I thought it might be useful to just touch on. So one of the things that we did is that, I mean, obviously, like lots of people, we were, you know, in a very immediate crisis position, but we thought about through that crisis, you know, what are the relationships that are really important to us? Who are the, you know, who are the key people that we need to keep working with through the pandemic, and obviously not realizing how long that would be when we set off at the beginning of this. But for us, some of the people that we prioritized were working with freelancers. Obviously, we can't do anything without the brilliant freelancers that we work with. So we made a decision to keep the Royal Shakespeare Theatre Acting Company on the books. So that was the company that would have been, in fact, they were in tech with Winter's Tale, so would have been performing Winter's Tale and Comedy of Errors in rep over last summer. So we kept them on our books, which was, you know, amazing to have them still with the company, and really meant that you were thinking about freelancers and acting company stage management, you know, in a lot of the decisions that you were making. Our schools, our associate schools and our school communities were also paramount important to us, so we made sure to keep working with them, and also our local communities. So, you know, how important the RSC is to Stratford and, you know, to everything that happens in Stratford. So how important, how reliant the town is on the theatre. So very briefly, obviously Stratford-upon-Avon's a small market town at the heart of England. It's got a population of about 40,000 and it receives over 5 million tourist visits a year. So, you know, you can see that immediately between the local population and the number of visits a year. So it's a small town, but it's a global destination. There's been a theatre in the town since 1879. In fact, before then, there's been a permanent theatre here since 1879. So there was kind of pop-up performances before then. They probably didn't call them pop-up then, did they? They didn't have that nomenclature. So yeah, like I say, when the building was shut, so here's a sad picture of a closed building with weeds in front of it. We really prioritised some of those key relationships. I thought it was worth just flagging a few other things that came up during the pandemic and where we put a lot of our focus. So I suppose echoing some of what was said earlier, you know, really working with new partnerships as well. So thinking for us about our relationship in the region, how do we work with other organisations, with individuals, with people at different scale, and how, you know, by coming together we can be stronger and we can talk about the whole of the West Midlands and we can support each other, work together, etc., etc. So that's been, I think, one of the really positives that's come out of the pandemic. We've worked really closely with the town to rebuild. So again, renewed relationships, I should say. So I now chair the Town Centre Strategic Partnership Group, where we're really looking at, you know, what are the opportunities for us to get to work better together and to think about where we want Stratford to be in 10 years' time. Some of you might have participated in Dream Online, that was based on partnerships, an amazing partnership project that had to pivot, as the word is, in order to present itself online completely in March, and that was watched by 65,000 people, which is an incredible stat. So we're now evaluating that and thinking about next steps. And as I said, lots of work with our national partnerships and work in schools. One of the, again, something that's come out of it is that those 2 shows that we should have been performing on the Royal Shakespeare Theatre stage have been presented in different ways. So The Winter's Tale was on BBC4 a couple of weeks ago and is on iPlayer for a year. And then now we're building a beautiful theatre in our gardens. So we're very lucky to own our gardens in Stratford. And we're building a 500-seat theatre, and we're going to perform Comedy of Errors through the summer. We've also been thinking about the small things that we can do to work with our local communities. So we ran a kindness shop when shops reopened in Stratford. We reopened alongside them with a kindness shop. And yeah, really working on lots of engagement programs in Stratford. So to think about working with people. And now we're, like everybody, kind of planning for the future, thinking about how we make sure, what are the really important things that we need to take forward from this. So thinking about our relevance, our, I'm sure lots of you are using this phrase already, but JEDI, so think about our justice, equality and the diversity and inclusion work. And yeah, what are the decisions that we meet, the big decisions we need to make about the kind of RSC that goes forward in the next 10 years. So, how do we tour? When do we reopen in London? What's our commercial activity? Big things like Matilda, obviously we want to get back open and going as soon as we can. So really lots of big conversations about trying to make the right decisions, and talking with lots of you, no doubt, about helping us to find our ways through that. So that's just a brief insight into some of the things that we've thought about over the last year and more, and some of the things that are informing us going forward. And yeah, really happy to answer any questions either individually or I'll put my email in the chat as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Geraldine. And yeah, I think just to underline the fact that kind of quick thinking, innovation, looking ahead about how to do things differently, they're all hallmarks across organisations in our sector, and it's so important to pull them out wherever we can. I'm going to try and attempt to tie everything up now within 2 minutes. So we've touched on today how we know, and we've proved before, how our creative industries and creative talent within that industry can deliver enormous value to communities throughout the UK. But we also know that value is not always recognised by government and the politicians who represent us too. And that's partly because we are a diverse set of industries, organisations and people made up of a high number of small businesses and freelancers as well. And unlike other major industries like manufacturing, which have fewer larger businesses and more traditional models of employment, we also draw our value from intellectual property, so creativity and ideas. And that's altogether paints a quite tricky picture to capture and communicate compared to a physical product like cars. And I think that's something that we've all been trying to get to the bottom of for quite a long time. And it's definitely something that we continue to work on. It means that when it comes to policy making and government communications, we can be an afterthought as a sector, or worse, excluded entirely. And that does inhibit our ability to grow, create opportunities and do what we do best. And so we need to continue working really hard over the coming months and years to ensure that our creative industries become and remain a priority for government. And there are some signs of encouragement. So we are mentioned in the government's recent plan for growth as a key sector or a priority sector. And we just now need to take that conversation forwards and ensure that commitment is translated into action. And that's something that everyone at the Federation and across our membership will be working together on. And it's something we have to do together, and we have to do it confidently, and we have to do it with conviction. So that's definitely something that we'll be prioritising. So that brings us to 1 o'clock. I had initially wanted to chat or take any questions, but it's crazy how much the time flies in these things, isn't it? So I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes if anyone has anything burning that they wanted to mention. But if not, thank you so much for tuning in today. And the programme looks really great across the next 4 weeks. Do tune into the rest of the sessions. And yeah, if you want to know more about us, do feel free to get in touch, drop us a line, and we're happy to chat.
Thank you, Lee. This has been great. Such a wonderful start of the festival. And also thank you for really illustrating the complexity of the sector. I think that's really, really important, and it's probably something that we will reflect upon rather than sort of maybe rushing into questions now. And you have provided contacts for people to go back. And I think we're all really looking forward to this report coming in July, which will really provide some more answers and responses to some of the questions. And also thank you, Geraldine, for providing an example of that resilience that we have seen across this year. I think it's been really great. I just wanted to remind all the participants that we are carrying on with this discussion tomorrow. We are zooming into the Oxford and Oxfordshire in an event organised in collaboration with Oxlab, Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. So we are looking again at sort of how we can drive a vibrant post-COVID-19 creative economy across the region. So come back tomorrow if you want to hear more. And in the meantime, thank you very much, Lee, Amanda, Geraldine, and Maya, for being with us today. Thank you very much.